Okay, we are live. Welcome, friends, to the first of 3 episodes of our newest perspective series. My name is Jonathan Perez, Senior Consultant at Thoughtium. I'm joined here with Norm, COO and Co-Founder of Thoughtium. We're going to be diving into the topic of high-performing teams together. How you doing, Norm?
Doing great. We're in the middle of a transition here for our team and our physical space. So we've been here at the 220 North Green office for almost 8 years, getting ready to move over to our newest spot, which is just a block down the street here in the West Loop. So a lot of transition happening at the end of the year.
A lot of movement happening here. Absolutely. So before we dive in, I want to give you a little bit of context in terms of what this perspective series is focused on. And the title of it, if you go to thoughttium.com/perspectives, you'll see the article there. It's the secrets of high performing teams. And we at Thoughtium love to work with teams and, of course, bring out the very best in them. And to give you the high level gist, you'll find a lot of detail there. Really what we're focusing on is trust as the foundation to high performing teams. And a lot of what we touch on in the article is some of the key behaviors that we believe build trust on a team and that leads to high performance. And you'll also find a toolkit there where we break down a lot more detail in terms of how to actually apply those behaviors in your day to day. So one of the reasons I wanted to bring Norm on is that at Thoughtium, and one of the reasons I joined at this point, 6 months now.
Unbelievable. Yeah.
Is that we have a high say-do ratio. And what that means to me is that we practice what we preach. We believe in the integrity of bringing forward the capabilities and the skills and the advisory perspective with our clients, but we can't do that if we ourselves are not practicing that. And so I thought we can have a really cool conversation, Norm, around how we're not only bringing that here internally with our team at Thoughtium and practicing trust building behaviors to really perform at the highest levels, but of course, how we bring that to our clients. So I'd love if you can share a bit about how you have seen the growth in terms of Thoughtium and how we continue to embed this high performing culture internally.
Sounds good. Well, first of all, great to be sharing this platform with you. Hard to believe it's been 6 months. You've already had such an impact and can't wait to see what's ahead. It was an easy yes when you had mentioned this perspective series. And for us to get a chance to share some of the work that we do, both with our clients, but equally as important internally. And so for me, when people ask what was it about Thoughtium that even for you 8 years ago, what was maybe the vision or what was your passion? It was being in the work and having a chance to actually demonstrate and say, what does great look like to build a culture, to have a high performing team, to have a growth orientation for your business. And in so many ways, we're doing that. And so I think for me, it's not just the academic exercise of talking about teaming or leadership development or strategy, but it's what are we doing? And how are we leading by example, testing and trying, what's our edge? And what are some of the learnings that we have as far as our own company that we can directly apply back when we're partnering with our clients? So excited to share again, we're in the work. That's why we're so passionate about this. We get a chance to test, try, and learn, and to really figure out, what does great look like?
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Yeah, and one of the things that I personally love about how we operate here internally at Thoughtium is that we know collectively as a team that there's so much theory out there in terms of leadership and so many different models and frameworks that, again, are beautiful and powerful. But we also understand that if we ourselves aren't practicing those things internally as a team, it's kind of difficult to bring that to support our clients. So, Norm, what are some of the initiatives you can speak to internally in terms of how we are developing our own teams here? And how have you seen that progress in terms of what you might have had to do at the beginning of Thoughtium? Because now it's 8 years.
8 years. Yeah.
Now we're about 20 folks here. So the dynamics change when it's just two of you. To now almost 20.
Well, this year we prioritized a learning progression for our people leaders. And it's so funny. We sat down and Amanda and I were taking a look, and it was it's super logical. What we're going to do is focus on some of the tactics for what great looks like to be a people leader. What does the day-to-day look like? Second was going to be around performance. We knew we were coming up on end of year. And so it's always a great opportunity to say, what does it look like to have those goal setting conversations and growth oriented conversations? And then maybe the third part would be around career. So again, a very logical piece, very traditional. And it was funny, every single time I got closer to it, I'm like, this isn't it. It was like, it isn't about the blocking and tackling, which is important. What I kept just unearthing is, what is it that's really sitting at the center of our business need?
Yep.
And what is it about a performance culture that is going to have the biggest impact in the day-to-day? When you think about those end of year conversations, they're great and very critical, but they happen, once a quarter, once every 6 months.
Year, yeah.
And so what if instead you had the opportunity to have the impact on a day-to-day basis? So we spent a lot of time just wrangling with, if you have an opportunity to create the space and a leadership development program for people leaders, for us in particular, what's going to sit at the center of it? And after several iterations, we started to arrive at one, we wanted to actually bring the leaders in to create their own perspective. So instead of it being didactic in a framework and talking about maybe some of the academics behind it, what if instead we had a chance to actually create the space and elevate above the day-to-day to co-author, like what's our perspective on feedback? What is our perspective on performance? So we had a chance to do that with our leaders. I'd say beyond that, we started to actually wrestle with, when you think about performance, there's two sides to performance. There's the business outcomes and the business performance, and then there's the meaningful growth of your people. And so the way we define performance is it's those two elements. They can actually be, instead of in contrast, in complement to each other. And so what we did is we started to ask, what is it about feedback and performance that wants to be integrated in our culture? What we arrived at is building a true learning environment, which means on a day-to-day basis, what does it look like for us to be able to provide maybe an experiment or an iterative type approach? How do we do some separation between the person and the work product? I know that's something that you and I have talked about. Easier said than done. We're all passionate. We all believe in our own individual work. When we get feedback and it's like we poured such passion into it, sometimes it's hard to receive. But imagine a world where it was more about like doing great work together and less so about maybe an indictment or a feeling that the relationship's at risk, or this is an expectation or a judgment on Norm as an individual. So, I'd just be curious for you as you think about kind of that, again, that tension between the passion for somebody's work and receiving feedback, knowing that it's about the work and not the person. What comes to mind for you?
Yeah, well, we've had plenty of conversations around this, and I can totally relate. I think that even the word feedback has this feeling tone to it, where I have some feedback for you. And there's part of us that hey, it's like they have something to say about me.
Yep.
And that's the conversation we've been having of how can we separate the quote unquote product from having it mean something about us as a person. And so, of course, we as leaders have to help those individuals that we're giving feedback to understand that. And at the same time, I do believe that it's part of our own individual work as leaders to be able to create that separation, because again, I have to do my own individual work to realize that if Norm gives me feedback on a certain project I'm on and something I produced or a certain deliverable, that again, it's the product that I'm receiving feedback on, not me as an individual, meaning it's putting my well-being or who I am at risk, if you will. So again, that's a deeper survival mechanism, which I want to speak to because it's normal to feel that way, but we have to be able to discern the reality that it's not a saber-toothed tiger in front of us, right? We're just getting opinions and comparing expectations against what was actually delivered on something specific. So I know that for us at Thoughtium, we have so many things happening and work streams happening that, of course, there's so many opportunities to deliver feedback, and it's inevitable that we have a lot of feedback going on, and that's what helps us serve our clients at even higher levels.
And what was interesting as we put together this first phase of our People Leader Accelerator, we focused on a couple of key concepts around one, experimentation, and asking ourselves as leaders, like, what is our relationship with risk, with failure? And it's funny because even those words, they feel heavy. They feel like, man, I don't really want to talk about my failures, or I don't maybe want to introduce risk or talk about risk. But it's like, imagine a world where we were normalizing those conversations and the team had the right context, that as leaders, our job isn't to shield the team from those types of inherent risks. Instead, it's to invite them. And I think sometimes as high performers, we put a certain premium that everything is high stakes. And we know that that's not true. And so what we're looking to do is to really be thoughtful about what does a learning culture look like, where we've got the opportunity to learn and grow together, to take certain risks, to know that not everything's going to go to plan. And when it doesn't, we're really having the opportunity to learn from that. And again, everything's not high stakes. And so in the situations where they are, you want to make sure you're talking about the risk. And as a leader, that doesn't mean you need to shoulder it yourself. It's like, let's talk about this as a team and let's build in some of the wisdom. So the next time we see this situation, it isn't expected that the most senior person in the room is the person with the right answers. It's like, we've seen this before as a team. What does this look like? So I think for me, just the big headline was a shift from maybe some of the traditional tactical, here's what we need to do as people leaders. I think we've got good people leaders and great people leaders. I think instead what we want to do is talk about our learning environment. And instead of having this, one-time event or this series, what if instead your day-to-day or in the flow of work, feedback and performance and growth was just the language. Yeah. And again, it's not so personal. And we have a human-centered approach. And like you said, you want to acknowledge that for all of us, we need to maybe change or adapt some of our relationship with those words.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's the big piece that we wanted to touch on. We were discussing in preparation for this episode of what we wanted to discuss. And when it comes to taking risks, inherently there are risks that come with the nature of being in business. But we were talking about how the world in and of itself is changing so fast, and that decisions are having to be made faster, and that everything does feel high stakes in the sense of the pace of things. And so there's a deeper empathy that I think we have for ourselves, but also for our clients, that the world is changing fast. And I want to connect that, Norm, to this conversation around trust. And I'm curious from your perspective, because I know that the leadership team, of course, has a lot of big decisions to make, especially as the organization grows and we're growing really fast. What are some of the things that you would say are supporting you all to perform really highly in terms of how you make decisions and support each other as a leadership team?
Well, one thing that we've continued to invest in is creating the space for different types of conversations. I think sometimes what happens is in the busyness, you feel like it's a check the box, or each meeting tends to look like it's the same as the next. And so I think what we've done is we've done a really good job of creating really intentional space for strategic conversations, for true relationship building or connection conversations, for the conflict conversations, or the times where we're maybe misaligned. And so to me, when you're able to create unique environments and unique situations for each of those different elements, you can be so much more effective. You can also identify there's a couple of areas where we're really strong, and maybe one or two areas where we haven't put the reps in, or we're not as connected. So something that we talk about, I think, is two things. One is to really make sure you're creating the space, especially as a leadership team. You're often taking care of maybe your clients or your direct reports, but are you getting a chance to build the team horizontally? And so I think it's so important as a leadership team to look at yourself and identify, we're an actual team, and what is it going to take for me to feel connected and a sense of commitment to that team? I think next is that word connected. Like, do I feel connected to the business, to each other, to where the relationship, again, isn't necessarily at risk, or I'm investing in the relationship so that when it gets hard, we're able to work on it together. And I think sometimes, again, in the busyness of work, sometimes the task or the outcomes like overshadow the opportunity. So how do you take pause moments? How do you find moments during the day, during the week, to also celebrate in some of like the hard, and celebrate some of like what you've been able to accomplish and what you've learned? And to me, the ability to have the perspective and the look back and the ability to celebrate the journey can really be the difference between the coming together of a leadership team and what can at times feel like you're running individual races and coming together just to report on status.
Yeah, I love hearing that.
Yeah.
Yeah, some of the key behaviors and some of the things you'll find in the toolkit from the Perspective series is at the very top is aligning on the mission and purpose. And to your point, what you're sharing is like, do I feel connected to what we're even doing here?
Yep.
And some of the conversation Norm and I were having as well is, if we don't feel connected as an individual leader, what am I doing about it so I can make sure that we come back into alignment as well? Norm, any other things you'd call out in terms of tips or things that you and the leadership team, and maybe even the extension, because we have an ELT as well.
Right.
Are there any tips that you would call out, or strategies or tools that you all use to stay in alignment? In addition to you mentioned how you structure and come very intentionally into different types of meetings. Anything else you'd add that you feel makes you all successful?
Well, I think the consistency of some of these forums and really getting a chance also to iterate as your team grows or evolves. So a good example of that would be our monthly business review. And if you were to ask us 2 years ago, it might have been just the leadership team. It might have been more numbers focused or outcome focused. And maybe in that season, that's what we needed. Fast forward to where we're at today. 3 or 4 months ago, we made the decision to actually change it to be more team led versus leadership team led. And even the type of conversation we're having in there, it's more about sharing some of the learnings and opportunities and great work that's happening, and less so of us reporting on the numbers. So to me, we changed the intention or, the experience that's being had by the team. And so all of a sudden you're getting different voices. You're getting to see the business in a different way. You can imagine how exciting it is to hear from your colleagues, some of the great work they're doing, some of the chances where they skin their knees. And what are the chances that we're getting more time together, like connected to the business. And so I think for us, we started to realize the difference between reporting on the business and feeling like the team is actually like deep in the work together, like connected to the business. So I'd say that monthly business review is something that I would challenge all of us as leaders to ask, like, how effective is that meeting? And is there a chance to create space and dialogue and unique experiences that are beyond just the numbers themselves? And then I'd say the second one is our quarterly, which looks different than our monthly. And it's an opportunity to look back across the 3 months and talk about each aspect of our business. And again, I think it's a chance to celebrate the journey of what did we prioritize, where did we see some big wins, and where did we maybe see some headwinds. And the team really getting a chance to spend 90 minutes or 2 hours in a very different orientation. It's above the day-to-day responsibilities. I'm getting a chance to look up and out from my vertical. And to me, again, it really is about the experience. And so what are the ways that you can look at that QBR and say, could we be doing this in person? Maybe even changing your physical environment. So I think there's several ways that you can create unique spaces for your team. And what it does above all else is gives a sense of belonging. And so when you think about trust comes by way of those moments. So what are the ways that I can create unique moments for my team that all of a sudden is the deposits of the trust? So as they go back in the day-to-day, again, I'm already getting a sense that I'm connected to something that's more than maybe my individual R&Rs or the deliverable of that day.
Yeah, well, I can attest to that. And yeah, one of the things for me that I really appreciate is transparency, but also the engagement that you all bring to those meetings, because they're not just about the numbers. They are about numbers also.
Sure.
How are we
Performance
doing
does matter.
How are we performing? But at the same time, being able to showcase an opportunity that we can bring our perspective as a broader team and actually inform the future of where we're headed collectively.
Yeah. And as you say that, like, what also comes to mind is the ability to storytell. Like, we're all humans, and like, to me, like, that's some of the most exciting stuff. And so we get a chance to hear different types of storytelling. I mean, we were just talking before we hit live that, my kind of version of leadership and storytelling might look different than, others that are on the leadership team. And that's great. Like, you want that level of diversity. And so to me, that's also a great opportunity for all of us. And that's how we connect, again, through stories. And so ask yourself, as you're stepping into a monthly or quarterly meeting and you're looking around the room and saying, like, what might be different about this time? Consider storytelling to be a key element.
Yeah, I love that. Well, I'm looking at time. I want to make sure we transition into conversations around how we support our clients with this topic of high performance and supporting different engagements that support the performance of not only the team, but at the broader organizational level. And I'm curious, Norm, any examples that come to mind where you've supported, well, it could be us as a team,
sure,
but maybe just through your experience here at Thoughtium. And I have one in mind as well that I can share, because we freaking love this work. This is what we do. So I thought we could share some examples in terms of how we've helped clients really arrive at higher performance.
Yeah. So what I'll say is the work that we do often sits at the center of growth and change. And so we love to be in that space, whether it's with a senior leadership team, whether it's with a, more of an inline manager and at that level, or with an entire team. And so most recently, we worked with a senior leadership team on a 2-day offsite. And so to me, it's one of those things where all of us are doing strategic planning. It's annual, it's that time of the year. And so you're talking about budgets and priorities and that type of, prioritization. But what are the ways, again, you can make sure that you're looking holistically for this leadership team to build a sense of trust, alignment, commitment, understanding that really is going to set you up for success and really catalyze you for 2025. And a good example of that is you take a 2-day offsite. I've been part of them where a leader might come in and say, hey, Jonathan, you're going to get the first hour. Norm, you've got the second hour. And it's like, it's very fragmented. You're not even exactly sure what are we working on. And so what we do is we really challenge leaders to think about, like, what is success? Like, what do we want to get out of having your leaders have 2 days of an immersive experience together? And typically there's 3 ingredients. One is the opportunity to truly elevate from the day-to-day and to create space for that team building or connection. Again, as a senior leadership team, often you've got very different verticals, and maybe on a day-to-day basis, we're not working together. So how do you create that real connection of, wait a second, we're actually a team here, and maybe I'm getting a chance to know or see you in a different light versus maybe some of the day-to-day tension that might be coming. So I think that's a big one, is team building. Second is perspective. So again, like, how do we look up and out? What's happening in the marketplace? How do we make sure that we're looking back at what did we learn from this year, or what are we doing ahead? But the ability to build a true leadership perspective, and everybody gets a fingerprint and a voice in that perspective, creates buy-in. Anytime I'm a part of something where I'm co-authoring and co-building something, I'm all in. So think about, again, that opportunity to co-author and co-build perspective together. And then the third one is strategic planning. And so when you think about planning, there's several different aspects that come into that. But I'll say one of them is the ability for the team to really be in an immersive, guided experience. So instead of having maybe 1 or 2 of us that are responsible for a traditional strategy, and it's kind of a top down, it gets sent out and there's like a laddering that's involved. Imagine a world where you've got, 15 leaders in the room, and they're all getting a chance to really share the wisdom, their experience prior to the business and coming into the business, and ways to set everybody up for success. What's in scope, what's out of scope, what are the assumptions we're making, and how do we make sure our team is going to be lit up as we actually bring a strategy into action? So again, I think those 3 aspects can really be the difference between kind of a run-the-mill, like check the box type, offsite, to asking yourself, if I have 2 days to like maximize the in-person experience, what are the things that I want to consider? Again, an aspect around team building or self-development. What are the ways that I can build self-awareness and other orientation? How do I build and create space for perspective building to really understand from the leadership, what are all the, kind of the holistic aspects? And then lastly is, how do we make strategy an action or immersive experience, not something that maybe a few people are disseminating out to the entire organization?
Sounds like you like designing and delivering.
I love it. Human-centered experiences. And I'll say, for me, it's the clouds and the dirt. So it's my opportunity to both think big in terms of like the ideas, but at the end of the day, I'm an operator. So that's the space that I love, is that translation between strategy to action.
Yes. Yeah. You're really good at that.
Thank you.
I love it. Yeah. That's amazing. And I love the breakdown of how do we make something that, again, can be traditionally thought of as boring. I mean, I'll go as far as saying that there's employees who don't look forward to their offsites, don't look forward to those experiences, because they already start to anticipate how it's going to go. Oh, well, this person's going to say this, we're going to do this, we're going to go through this presentation. And that's how we love to bring those experiences to life. And how do we make them really experiential, but also very valuable for those that are attending, which is amazing.
And I know that you had mentioned you were of a particular offsite. And what I love about kind of your example is maybe less so of how is it designed and structured, and more so of like the fabric or texture for what's in the room.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that inspired this perspective series on building trust and high performing teams is that I began to notice that there can be teams that are doing all of the right things. They're sending each other the feedback, they're giving each other things that can be better. They might be taking action on their responsibilities, and they might come together in a leadership meeting, and the content in terms of what they're talking about and what they're discussing, it makes sense from the outside in, right? They're setting strategy, setting priorities, keeping each other accountable, which is cool, right? There's a certain effectiveness to that. And one of the things that at a recent offsite we had the opportunity to do with an executive team was really challenge them to look at, cool, you're talking about those things, but let's pay attention to how you're talking about those things. Are they being talked about from a place of openness and trust and curiosity? Or are you connecting on this from a place of defensiveness and trying to be right? And so what I notice in the space is that there's this desire to want to be right about their certain perspective, which again is really driven through a survival mechanism, the way I see it.
Yeah.
And it limits the performance, but also the creativity. And what you can tell in the space is that there's very little trust happening. There's not a general trusting. And what that means, the way it showed up, Norm, the way I saw it was, well, if I say this, I might get met with defensiveness.
Sure.
Or this person already thinks they're right, so I'm not even going to voice my perspective. And so, as you can imagine, the level of trust over time, in particular, is not only low already, but the repetition of those types of meetings and engagements and offsites, the trust goes lower and lower and lower and lower and lower. So, a big challenge for that group was, how can you individually take responsibility for your own process? And if you catch yourself wanting to be right or wanting to get defensive, no problem. Just notice that that's happening for you and shift. And also challenging themselves to call themselves out and say, hey, I notice I'm getting really defensive right now. I'm going to pause. Let's continue the discussion on something else while I gather myself, as an example. But in terms of the value we added as Thoughtium was being able to be a big mirror for them, right? It's not about judging them as an individual. It doesn't mean anything about them as a person, but can we reflect back to them, right? Is that effective or ineffective? And if it's ineffective, how can we shift that so you can get more value from those offsites and those team engagements that, again, are necessary? So how do we make them more valuable?
And you were the right person to be in that room. And to me, again, it was so fascinating to hear the way that partnership or that kind of value add came forward, which was less about subject matter expertise or maybe some more traditional consulting, but it was more about, like you said, the how and the subtle interactions. So when you think about situational awareness or even just the ability to be in conflict or in alignment with others, there's so much trust that's so critical. Yeah, so, if you were to have or talk to one of those leaders, what do you think their experience was, or what was maybe an aha moment that you saw in that room that can help others say, like, I hear you say it's in the how the communication or conversation was happening, but maybe share a little bit, go maybe one or two clicks in, like, what would that leader say about that experience?
Yeah. In retrospect, the main thing I did notice, I'll say two things. One, there was a greater level of self-awareness. And so once we called out the elephant in the room that some of us were defensive, right? Then they start to be self-aware and notice, oh, wow, usually I don't even realize I'm defensive, but I notice I was about to say this thing, or I'm about to respond to them, and I notice I'm getting jacked up on adrenaline by getting defensive. I'm getting worked up. So that self-awareness was huge. And some of the reflections was that they walked out of there with a higher level of self-awareness. The second piece I'd call out is leaders even calling out other of their leaders in the room, and by them taking responsibility for being more self-regulated and being more in a place of curiosity, it invited other leaders who are usually quiet or reserved to speak up, because all of a sudden there's more trust in the space and they feel safe to voice their opinion without getting chewed out or without getting called out in a certain way. And so I would say that would be one of the biggest takeaways is we, as an executive team, they value so much the opinions of their people, but if they're not expressing those thoughts or perspectives, then they're missing out on that value. So that would be, I would say, a big takeaway.
It's so funny. Like, as you share that, it just reminds me of how important it is for us to have that self-awareness and ability to communicate and also show a bit of vulnerability in those moments. And you can just imagine that by demonstrating that, whether it's with your colleagues, with your team, or with this executive team, all of a sudden, the guardrails come down a little bit.
Yes.
And all of a sudden, maybe I can set my armor down, or I feel more comfortable also acknowledging my role in the conflict or my participation in this conversation. So again, like, as you're saying that, it just, for me, was such a reminder of the power in demonstrating the behavior, demonstrating what great looks like.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's a big part. So again, to what you're saying, Norm, the big challenge for them that I called them forward on was saying, hey, if you want to see more trust here in this room, it's going to have to start with you individually. And going all the way back to the beginning of our conversation, again, a lot of what I love about our team is that we're willing to walk the talk. And we're willing to say, hey, if we're over here supporting and want to support teams in a certain way, how do we hold each other accountable to operate at that level as well, so we can meet them there? And I truly operate under that philosophy that we can only take others or our clients as far as we're willing to take ourselves.
Love that.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I'm looking at time. We'll start to close out here, Norm.
Great.
Anything else that maybe you thought we'd touch on that we haven't, as it relates to high-performing teams, building trust with teams?
I think we all have a desire to be a part of a high-performing team, and at different elements, whether it's in your professional environment or outside. We've all had those moments where you looked around, you're like, I'm part of a great team. I feel connected. I feel like, I can be at my best. And so if you're asking yourself as a leader, hey, we're not quite there, or we're trying to figure out like, what's the right next step? Interestingly enough, and you had mentioned it, it starts maybe in two ways. One is self-awareness and acknowledgement. And so to me, the more you're communicating to your team, like, these are some areas that I'm working on. Like a good example is, I was working recently with, a couple of our colleagues, and I had mentioned something I'm looking forward to is leading from behind versus out in front. And I can be the man in the arena, the spotlight's on, like, happy to step into that space. But I also want to create opportunities and be more enabling for others to step into that space, particularly just giving them a chance to, again, test, try, and learn. And so by me saying that, we were able to have more, direct conversations and say, like, is this the right moment? Here are some real considerations where maybe it's not quite the right fit, or yes, this is the right time to do it. But it really started with me. So I think one is, what's the immediate action I can take, is like some real introspection on what part of your leadership needs to evolve for kind of the next season that you're in. And then two is the ability to, especially in a team setting, to be able to name it. It doesn't mean you need to solve it. Doesn't mean you need to have all the right answers, but like to name, hey, this might be here, what's going on, or this is how I'm showing up, can really be the difference between being aligned and having high trust to feeling like this is the same story or the same conversation. So again, I think, a combination of self-awareness and the ability to, in a team setting, demonstrate can really set you in the right direction.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, well, that's where I think we can definitely come to a close on the topic of trust and building high-performing teams for now. And yeah, as a big reminder, whatever change you want to see in your team, in your organization, or with anyone, really be the change. I know it sounds cliche, philosophical, but it's true, right? Really embodying that very change that we want to see with our teams. So if you're interested in going deeper, check out the Perspective Series article. So Thoughtium.com/perspectives. This is the first episode of 3 in the series. And be sure to also check out the toolkit, which goes a little bit deeper on some of the tools that you can use to build trust with your teams. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you on the next one. Thank you, Norm.
Appreciate it.
Until next time.